Hey, what's up? It's Jared Hill, and today I wanted to share with you the Sony F4 70-200 full frame lens. Now, this lens is fantastic, and to be honest, I held off on buying it for a little while because its max aperture is f4. And for me, coming from a Canon background, was kind of leery of anything that is lower aperture than a 2.8. Like, I loved that 2.8 or wider because low light situations were no match for me in my 2.8 lenses or faster lenses than that. So the F4 really just, it took a while for me to get over that. That combined with the assumption that F4 meant not having as shallow depth of field as an f2.8 lens. Now, I did a comparison of my Canon 5D Mark III and the Sony A7S, and both of the cameras had the 70-200 lenses. The Sony had this one, the Canon had the 2.8 70-200 lens. And I did a depth of field test, and there's a little bit of a difference. You can tell that the Canon did exceed this camera in the depth of field test, but this is definitely not a reason to discount this lens. This lens, though f4 being its widest aperture, is still fantastic when shooting for a short depth of field. So I'm glad that I decided to buy it, and the reason that I decided to buy it was because I did not like the performance of the camera with my Canon lens attached to it. I bought the made-of-bones adapter and attempted to attach my Canon 70-200 2.8 to the camera, and the autofocus just was unusable. The autofocus would have been fine for video situations, but definitely not for photography when you're needing to refocus quite often. Usually with video, I kind of use autofocus to get me there and then turn off autofocus and go in manual from there. And that was okay, but that's not gonna fly when shooting photos out in the field. So this lens is definitely different than most of the other E-mount lenses for Sony. This one actually has switches on it, which most of the other lenses do not have switches on them at all. And you have to change all of your focus settings or image stabilization settings from the back of the camera. So this lens definitely has autofocus, manual focus. You can still control that from the camera, and sometimes I do just because it's became a habit. You don't have to turn off your focus on the lens. You could still do that in camera, or of course you could do it with the switch. The optical steady shot, which you can turn on and off on the lens, and then has two different modes, 1 and 2, which is the intensity of the optical stabilization in the lens. Those options are right alongside the camera as well. So if you combine the amazing optical stabilization that this lens has with the sensor stabilization that is on the A7 II camera, you get some amazingly steady shots. I have been able to travel down to the slowest of shutter speeds I've ever been able to shoot at handheld, which is just fantastic. Also adding in the ability to shoot handheld video with a zoom, which normally I would never do because having just the uncontrollable ability to hold the camera still, I always have shake because we naturally have that. And when you're shooting, you don't want camera shake because it's just not fun to watch. So with this camera, having that stabilization on that A7 II combined with the fantastic stabilization inside of this lens means that I can even shoot some video handheld, which is pretty fantastic. So in talking about other features of this lens, one thing that I thought was fantastic was these buttons that are located around the barrel of the camera. What these allow you to do is basically disable autofocus once you've pulled focus on whatever it is that you're trying to take pictures of. Now, on my Canon, I would actually, in all of my Canon DSLRs, I would disable pre-focus on the shutter for that exact reason. whenever you hit the shutter and start to pre-focus, the camera searches. Even if you're already focused on what you're trying to take a picture of, the camera quickly tries to refocus. And that can result in you losing your shot. Whatever you're trying to get, you might lose that moment, especially if things are happening quickly. So with these buttons here, you're able to actually disable that ability. So when you're taking photos and you're pre-focused and you know your focus is set, you just simply hold in this button and your camera does not try to refocus. And I think that is just an amazing feature, which is something I obviously had to change in the settings of other cameras of mine. Even before I realized that this was an option on a lens, which it's only an option on this lens. The other Sony E-mount lenses do not have this option. I was looking at what settings I would have to change to disable pre-focus in the shutter button and assign pre-focus to another button on the back of the camera, which is what I did with my Canon. However, being able to do that on the lens definitely is an added feature, which I really like. So if you like the ability to pre-focus with your shutter, which is useful, especially if you hand your camera to someone else who's not an experienced photographer and doesn't necessarily know anything other than pushing down the shutter button to capture a photo, I like being able to leave my camera this way. I can hand the camera to my wife and she could take a picture of me and my kids, and I don't have to worry about the focus being off because of her forgetting to push the back button or whatever. It's not natural for most people. So in this lens, that's definitely a feature I like, being able to basically turn off autofocus temporarily as you continue to take photos. So one of the things that I do like about this lens is that it does have two different lengths as far as its minimum focal range, 3.28 feet or 4.92 feet. That's kind of a range, or 1 meter or 1.5 meters if that is your measurement system. What I like about that is that I'm able to get fairly close to items when I'm taking pictures. For example, when I'm getting detail shots at a wedding, one of the things that plagues me is not being able to get close enough to that object and still be able to focus on that object. Like when I'm taking pictures of the ring or the bouquet of flowers. I don't have any macro lenses for my camera yet, and I don't believe that there are any macro specific E-mount lenses at this time, which definitely makes it challenging for those of us that are trying to take detail shots of things, or maybe even shoot photos of birds or flowers or something like that. You need something that you can get close to and this lens you can get pretty close with that. So other things that I really like about this lens is just how smooth it feels to zoom. It does rotate in a different direction than what I was used to as far as zooming, so that took a little getting used to. Zooming in, you rotate in a different way than what I was used to, and I'm fine with that now. I actually like rotating this way and zooming in, and then rotating that way, zooming out. It feels a little bit more normal to me. The focus ring is very smooth and tight. It's not overly tight. It flows really nice in your fingertips. Though this tripod mount here, tripod support, typically can be removed. I like having it here because it rests nicely in my hand and then allows my hand to really smoothly control focus or zoom on the lens. Without this, the lens does feel a little small in my hand because I'm used to that Canon 70 to 200 millimeter zoom. So one thing that I do often use a lot is this mount, simply because this is a larger lens and I don't necessarily like tripod mounting this camera with this lens hanging off the front of it. Though it secures very nicely to the camera, it still worries me over time that it would wear out that connection, and then I'd end up having troubles with either the lens or the camera body. So having that tripod mount there is fantastic. So overall, this lens is fantastic. When shooting at either 70 millimeters or zoomed in at 200, there is absolutely no distortion at the edges. there are situations where you can make distortion happen at 70 millimeters, but it's not very apparent even when you're shooting architecture. There is of course, in Adobe Lightroom, there's a profile adjustment for this camera that almost does little to nothing in most situations when I apply it, simply because this camera and this lens do such a good job working together. The color contrast and everything that you're able to get with this lens, it just pulls in so much light and color and vibrance and throws it on that sensor, and you just produce a beautiful image, as well as edge-to-edge clarity of the image. There's almost no smoothing or softness at the edges of the photo, which is definitely something I look for in lenses and is very important, because most of the time when I'm using this lens, it's for some form of portraiture, or I'm shooting a wedding and I'm kind of far back trying to get as zoomed in as I can to a subject. And so having edge-to-edge clarity is extremely important, and this lens performs well there. This lens is specifically for the full frame line of Sony mirrorless cameras with the E-mount. Doesn't mean that you can't use it on a crop sensor camera such as the A6000, A5100. You could definitely use it on those cameras and it will work relatively well, with the exception that the camera body will just be so tiny on the end of it and you'll have this big lens hanging off in front of you. So as I said before, I hesitated on purchasing this lens simply because it's an f4 aperture on, and that to me was something I wasn't quite comfortable with. And a lot of people have asked me that question. Yes, but it's an f4 and you can't go down to 2.8, or you can't, go down even lower than that, or wider than that. And that's an issue. That was an issue to me. However, the depth of field is definitely very good at f4. And then of course, you can control other aspects of that with the way that you light subjects and stuff like that. But f4 definitely has worked out really well for me. Haven't had any situations where I felt that I wished I could have gone down to 2.8. Having a wider aperture, of course, is nice. It's just not happening with these Sony zoom lenses. Most of the zoom lenses are all an f4 or a variable aperture for that. And variable apertures, I'm not a big fan of those at all. So f4 is definitely usable, and it didn't deter me from deciding to go after using these Sony full frame mirrorless cameras. So this camera lens specifically is a 72 millimeter filter. Filters I have not yet purchased for this specific size, but I plan to. I think this camera combined with this lens is a powerful combination, whether you're with this camera or the A7S for maybe shooting video. This is a powerful combination, and I look forward to in the future even being able to use this lens on the FS7, which is a camera that I plan to purchase in the near future, which of course is a cinematography style camera, not a photography style camera. So definitely a lens worth getting there aren't a whole lot of options at this time compared to shooting on A-mount, Sony A-mount, or even shooting Canon. So this is almost a must-have lens as being a photographer, or even being someone who shoots video for whatever purposes. Having the 70-200 is kind of a must-have. But the features that this lens comes packed with definitely are impressive and have blown me away in their usefulness. So thanks for checking out this video. If you have any questions, ask them below the video, as well as you can follow me on Twitter at Jared Hill, where I'd be more than happy to have a discussion about this lens, camera, or pretty much anything photography related. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.